We started last week with what I thought was going to be our final message of the series, and we only made it through 3 of the points. We're going to endeavor to make it through the next 7 this morning, and I think we can do that if I'll stay focused and not chase too many rabbits or that kind of thing. And so we want to do that. And what we're doing is talking about practicing the mind of Christ. And these are all of these, except for the last one, is actually they're statements from Jesus' words and his thoughts, and then kind of how it affected him. We see how it affected him, and then how it might affect us. And so we're going to just kind of jump right in at number 4. And if your outline near you should have the first 3 filled in. If you have any questions on that, feel free to check later. Even though we had problems last week with the Facebook Live, I think you can actually pick that up if you need to. So we welcome you to do so. So number 4 is I let God help me choose my words. I let God help me choose my words. Now, it might seem almost interesting that Jesus would say something like this because he's God, but he is one of a Trinity. And so as we, and I'm not going to give a lesson on the Trinity today. We believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And they're not going to do anything in contradiction to the other. And really, we believe there's one God who represents himself to us in 3 persons. And so Jesus, being the Son of God, is saying that he said this in John chapter 12, verse 49. I have not spoken on my own. Instead, the Father who sent me tells me what I should say and how I should say it. So he's saying, I will not say anything that is in contradiction to my Father. We are one. Our message is one. We are unified on this. And I was just thinking as I was kind of reviewing the message again this week, I was thinking, wow, probably for most of us, this one right now at this season, this time in our world, this is as important as anything for us to say, I want to be like Jesus. I want to let God help me choose my words. Has anybody here been tempted to say something that maybe was just, was out of order, but you really still felt like saying it? Anybody here in this time period with everything going on? Anybody here? Well, I'm glad to know I'm among saints. There's only about 4 of you raise your hand, so rest of you, I want to attend the sainthood class, okay? So whichever among you that didn't raise your hand, let me know. But I've been tempted a few times to say something that didn't come from God. It came from Rod, and it wasn't going to be wise to say it, and it wasn't probably going to help anything. And you could probably go back and look at your Facebook postings and analyze and see how you're doing on that. How's that going? And so I know again I'm in here with the saints, so that's wonderful. So you guys probably don't need to bother doing that. But the fact is, I think a lot of people today, even well-meaning people, are having a lot of trouble with just saying whatever they think and saying it no matter kind of what the consequences. Now, I believe in free speech, okay? Understand that. I believe very strongly in free speech. But I also believe that as a Christian, we are citizens of heaven, and that we answer to God, and that it is our responsibility. Jesus said some very, very hard words. He said some very hard truths. He didn't mask anything. But at the same time, he said this: I'm only going to say what my Father tells me to say. And I believe the best checkpoint any of us can have is if we just ask ourselves, does this represent my Heavenly Father well? Does this represent something that would advance God's kingdom? And so there's different ways to say tough things, and sometimes we have to say tough things, and sometimes those tough things do divide people because of differences of view that are so strong or those kinds of things. But our intent should never be to drive wedges between us and other people because of our words. And so Jesus, what a great example of just saying, I let God help me choose my words. I'm not going to just spout off the mouth. I'm going to say what the Father wants me to say. Number 5, I don't worry about pleasing everyone. Now, there's a phrase, a song, I think, too. Can't please everyone, so you got to do what? Please yourself. Now, is that what Jesus is saying here, you think? No, I don't think that's what he's saying at all. Okay, let's look at, he's not saying that. He goes, I only try to please the one who sent me. And so Jesus said, I can't please everyone. My goal is not to please everyone. My goal is to please the Father who sent me. That is my goal. And I believe what Jesus is teaching us here is this concept that we've talked about at times in church, and we've talked, Christians talk about it, and that is having an audience of one. Having an audience of one. And whenever we get to the point where our main goal in life is to have an audience of one, and that is that we are performing, we are living our life, we are fulfilling our life obligation accountable to God. Now, that doesn't mean that, if you're married, obviously you have an accountability to your spouse. If you have children, you have an accountability to your children. If you have a boss, you have an accountability to your boss. If you have employees, you have accountability to your employees. I mean, there's a lot of things we have accountability to, but that we live, we make the decisions that we do, and we're trying to please God. I am absolutely convinced that if we live our lives in order to please God, that your spouse will like you better than if you don't try to please God. If you do it some other way, it will not honor your spouse. But if you and when I say this, of course, that's a spouse that cares about God or cares about you pleasing God. But I think typically speaking, whenever we set out to please God, what happens is we fulfill our basic obligations in life at a much higher level. Now, that does not mean that everybody will be happy with us. And Jesus wasn't going around always putting his finger to the wind. He'd have made a terrible politician, even though he's very popular at times. But he wasn't here to be a politician. He wasn't here to make everybody happy. I mean, I would say the time that he probably, in a sense, did something that was, you would say was, wow, that pleased everybody, was the time that he fed the 4,000, the time that he fed the 5,000. I mean, who doesn't like to have their stomach filled? On the way to church this morning, Hunter asked me, he said, Dad, are they serving food today at church at the water thing? And so part of it was we were running late, so I wasn't getting them anything on the way. I mean, if they didn't get some in the house, that was it. And so we were running late, and he said, are they serving food when the water thing's going on? I said, there's Kona ice there. If you want to call that food, then he says, can you order anything you want? I said, well, I think they only serve Kona ice, whatever. And so anyway, but for him, it was going to be a better day if there was food involved. It was going to, and water's good and all that stuff, but man, it's going to be a much better day if they got some food here. And most of us, that's appealing to us, and it's something. So Jesus certainly was crowd pleasing that day in the sense everybody went away with a full tummy instead of hungry. But that wasn't his point, because you know what the scripture says in that moment. He looked at the crowd and he had compassion on them. He's thinking of the distance they had to walk, and they'd been there all day long, and he wasn't going to send them away hungry. And so it wasn't a political move. It wasn't that. It was out of his compassion for people that he did that. Now, I just want to tell you, if you live to please people, you will probably be a fairly miserable person, because I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but people are kind of hard to please. And people are also fairly fickle. They want something this way this time, then they want it this way the next time, and so it's kind of hard. If you're out, our goal should never be to make people happy. Our goal should be to do the right thing and to honor people appropriately before God. But our goal is not to make people happy. I mean, our kids today, and any time probably, I think maybe it's a little bit more accented today have a tendency to think that a parent's job is to make them happy or to let them not be bored. And so, if you, I believe appropriate boredom for a child can be a good thing, because then creativity can set in, and all of a sudden they'll come up with things and think of things they hadn't thought of before, and it's initiated from their own mind and everything else. And so I just think that it's good for us to even be willing. I mean, I don't try to say it all the time, but I've had to say this to my kids before. It's not my job to entertain you. I want you to have an enjoyable life and fun, but it's not my job to entertain you. You need to be creative and find some ways to entertain yourself, and it's not our job to make everybody happy all the time. And if you grew up as a person who set out to please everybody, that's wonderful. I mean, I actually asked God what was wrong with me, because of my 4 kids. All of them, are adopted. But out of those 4 kids, I love them to pieces. But all of them are strong-willed. All 4. They believe arguing is, a national right for in that. I mean, it's in their and they're not easily dissuaded from that. I mean, it's like, sometimes I'm like, does everything have to be a battle? Do I have to gear up for battle? So if you have a compliant child, I'm very jealous of you. I mean, I really am. If you have a child that is just so compliant and they always do what you say and they hardly ever cause any stir, anything like that, I just said, God, out of 4, could I have just had one that was compliant? Just one. That's all I would ask. So what was wrong with me that you need to give me 4 strong-willed kids? I mean, I'm assuming they're my gift of working on Rod, And so but then I will have to tell you this too. The one thing that I do realize about tough kids is, I'm not going to live forever. So when I'm dead and gone, that toughness will probably get them through, and they'll be okay, And so sometimes, you can worry about a compliant child. Are they going to be all right? Are they going to let people run over them? Are they going to be taken advantage of? Are they going to, whatever? So, pleasing everyone it sounds good, but it's not good. Jesus' goal was not to please everybody. And I'd encourage all of us to kind of take that position of saying, I'm not out to displease anybody. I'm not out, sometimes there are some people who feel it's their calling just to be negative. Their answer is no to everything. If everybody else is for it, they're against it. Everybody else likes this team, they're going to like the other team. I mean, they're just contrary. Now that is not a spiritual gift, by the way. There's been a few Christians who have thought that it was a spiritual gift. And so being contrary is not a spiritual gift, okay? And it's not something you do. But Jesus did not set out to please everyone. He said, I only try to please the one who sent me. Good advice. Number 6, I depend on God's power instead of my own. I depend on God's power instead of my own. I assure you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. I was on the phone with someone this week who's very broken. They're broken in multiple ways, and life is kind of crashing down around them right at the moment, and in family life, and in just in general in life, a lot of things. And one of the things that they said to me was this: I felt like it was up to me to make everything work. I felt like it was up to me to make everything work. And I won't get into all the details specifically of what that was, kind of every area of their life. And instead of placing it in God's hands and saying, God, these are some of these things I can't do. I can't make happen. I'm dependent on you. I think with good intentions. I don't think they were even trying to have bad intention, trying to make it happen on their own. And I'm just going to tell you, folks, if we try to do life by making it happen ourselves, most of the time we'll find life in broken pieces. And the good news is God knows how to take broken pieces and put them back together and make it better than before. And that's what we're praying for in this situation with this individual. But I want to tell you, don't try in your own power to do anything. And I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's, make your marriage stronger. And I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Well, there are things you need to do. But you need to seek God's face and his help and his strength and his guidance in that. And, I'm going to fix this kid of mine. I'm going to make him be like this or like that. That we have to put some of those things in God's hands and trust him and do our part, yes, but depend on his power to do what we cannot do. And I'll just tell you, as a parent of my adult children, I have more experience there, and it is that I was one of my kids I really tried to fix. And let me tell you, God can do a much better job of fixing people than we can. He just can. And I've lived long enough now to see that happening, and that's a wonderful thing to see God. But it took me a long time not to try to fix it myself, not to try to make it. And so, but I will tell you, Jesus said, I depend on God's power. I can't do anything by myself. I depend on what God is doing and what he wants to do. And if you're in business, if you're, on a job, or, your whatever kinds of things that you're engaged with, to let God's power work. And certainly, now this isn't a freebie for us. We have to be involved. We have to roll up our sleeves. We have to do what we can do. But we're depending on God to come through. I was talking to my brother Steve, who's the businessman out of my brothers, and we were just talking about risk. Right now, risk is a big thing because of the COVID-19, all these other things. But we were actually talking about a business situation, and he said, Rod, I've kind of looked at it like this: if there isn't an if in the situation that you're getting into, or you're doing, or you're gonna, something that you're gonna participate in, then if there isn't an if, then where's the challenge? Where's the challenge? And now, I don't mean, and I don't think he meant this for sure, that you ought to live so close to the edge that, if you lean, you'd fall over. But what he is saying is this: if there isn't some kind of a challenge in it, then, what is there? It's like the challenge is kind of what makes life. And so sometimes, I think we need, I'm afraid our world has become too concerned. And when I say this, I'm really not even saying this about COVID-19, so don't take that in a personal way on that. But I think that our world has become obsessed with safety. And, if you remember a comedian a few years ago, he came out, his whole line was, wear a helmet. And he was talking about how before, back when he was growing up, you didn't wear a helmet. You hit your head on stuff. You got scars to prove it and show it. And, you got all this, and we're just so safety conscious. And safety's a good thing. But, we can't just be wrapped in bubble wrap. And so what I think is a good way to live our lives is be wise, make the best decisions possible, take calculated risks, and depend on God as though your life depended on it. And it does. It does. And Jesus said, I assure you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. And so it is critically important for us to depend on God for everything. Number 7, I forgive my enemies and those who hurt me. Now, honestly, I'm generally a little bit nervous about putting a line in here like that into a sermon, because there are things that run really, really deep with regard to this forgiveness issue. And there's room for a lot of misunderstanding in people's minds about this. You know, some people think that if you forgive someone, you got to make that person your very best friend. You know, you got to do lunch with them every day or every week or every, you got to. Forgiving someone is a personal choice that we make, that we're not going to take it on ourselves to exact revenge. What I want to encourage you is this: forgiveness matters, and forgiveness matters for your benefit as much as it does anybody else's benefit. And because when we choose not to forgive, we hold on to something that will eat away at us. It will tear away at us. And I don't think there's anyone alive. Every person in this room right now, I'm going to say every person in this room, you have a good reason to hold a grudge at someone, and probably a few more than just one someone. You have a good reason to. You have good reason to feel angry at someone. You have a good reason to feel like you've been wronged by somebody in your life. Everyone here, I don't think you can escape it. Every person here has been wronged in some way. And so we all have to choose when we've been wronged how we handle that. And Jesus said on the cross, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And then he also said in Matthew 5, love your enemies. And this is the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who despitefully use you or persecute you. Now, again, that can sound like you got to go do lunch with them every week or every other day or something like that. If you forgive them, then you got to go do that. I do not think that's what Jesus is saying. But what he is saying is this: instead of wishing them ill, you ask for God to be with them. You're not going to pray against them. You're going to pray for them. You may not pray, you're going to pray particularly for God to be faithful. You're not going to pray for God to exact revenge on them. That's up to God. We have to place all that in God's hands. And we can pray for our own healing in that. I want to tell you, Jesus had plenty of people who hurt him, who did things against him. And I believe, just as on the cross, the very people who were killing him, he forgave them. But I also want to say this, and this is something I think to remember. It's sort of a unwritten thing that I noticed in the Scripture. When Jesus left a situation where there was hatred spewed at him, or where people were verbally abusing him or otherwise, he left with friends. Let me just, I didn't look at every passage to make 100% sure, but just the best I could collect from thinking back through and looking up some of the passages where Jesus was persecuted or he was spoken against, those kinds of things. In those situations, now he did go to the house of Zacchaeus, but in situations like he went to houses of people who were against him. But I'm talking about where there was actual verbal abuse happening to him. When he left that situation, to the best of my knowledge, he always walked away with those who were his friends. And that is an unstated thing, but I think it really has some power to it, and that is this: you can choose to forgive someone and not go live with that person. You can choose to forgive someone and not go spend the next day with them. Because it's a personal inner choice. And so I just want to encourage you that if there's someone that you need to forgive, to understand and know that doesn't mean that you have to cow to them, that you have to do whatever they say, you have to start hanging out with them all the time. It just means that you set yourself free and you place them in God's hands. If I could just simplify it as much as that, just say you set yourself free and you place them in God's hands. What a wonderful thing to be able to do. Because truthfully, we cannot fix these things, but we can let God fix us. We can't fix other people. We can't fix those things, but we can let God fix us to the point that we're not weighed down and burdened by this, and we can be set free. And now, I would say this: if you don't touch a hot stove because you did it when you were a kid and you learned the lesson when you were 2 years old, you're going, nah, not doing that again. And so you don't ever touch hot stoves again. Then you can also learn there are some situations, some people you probably better not put yourself in the middle of. You have the choice to make. And so if someone is continually hurting you, you need to remove yourself from that situation. And removing yourself from that situation doesn't mean you hate them, doesn't mean you wish them ill. It means that you respect yourself enough not to be abused. And you can still choose to forgive them and not go there. I don't think Jesus in no way was, we know he prayed in the garden that if there's any other way this could happen besides going to the cross, it would happen. He was willing to go, but even on that cross when they were killing him, he said, Father, forgive them. They don't even really understand what they're doing. And I would say this, there are some people who are mean enough, they may know what they're doing, but there's a lot of people who hurt people and they are hurt themselves. They don't even know. I'll always try to look under the hood a little bit, and you can't always know. But I'm always assuming that if, someone rages at me or something like that, and I can't think of a good situation or I'd share it. So it doesn't happen very often. But where someone's, really, really mad at you, and he or they, whatever, I have to always look at it like this. There's that temptation to want to kind of kick back a little bit. But there's always going, man, I wonder what is under their hood. It's probably not good. What they're dealing with is probably not good. So, my younger brother, Randy, who pastors in Salisbury, North Carolina, he called me the other day, and he said, I just have to ask you a question. He said, have you ever been called an old, and I won't say the name here, okay? But he said, have you ever been called, well, I will say it because now you're wondering, and if Facebook has to bleep it out, then go ahead, an old bastard. Have you ever been called an old bastard? I said, no, I haven't. He goes, well, I had some guy get so mad at me, and we were driving, and he pulled over and motioned me pull over. Somehow he thought Randy pulled up too close to him or something, and he said he got out of his car and he just railed on me. He just kept calling me this old, whatever. He goes, do I look that old, really? I said, I don't think it had anything to do with age. I just think he was just mad and calling you names. I said, he goes, well, he said, I called Rick and he hadn't been called that either. And I've called Steve. And now he says, now I'm thinking, man, what's wrong with me? And I said, it's how you drive, boy. And people, but that guy probably was not having a good life right at that moment. I'm just assuming he was looking for someone to take it out on, and my brother looked like a good candidate, and so he could have said, well, I've got a 30-some-year-old heart in here, but remember, not to forgive hurts you more than it hurts the other person. Forgiving sets you free, and it places the other person in God's hands. Number 8, I am willing to sacrifice for others. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And then Mark 10:45 says, Jesus said, I came here not to be served, but to serve others, and to give my life as a ransom for many. And then in 1 John 3:16, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for each other. There's something in serving that puts us in the right place. When we serve other people, it puts us in the right place. And it's not always easy to know how to do that and what ways to do that. There are so many needs in the world. I mean, we kind of had to make a decision as a church early on that we can't meet all the needs of the world. We can't meet all the needs of Augusta. But we need to know how to meet some needs and the needs that we've been called to meet. And we need to be faithful to that. One of the very strong areas that God's allowed us to meet needs has been through people who have been through addiction and been through pretty deep problems and have come to a realization that they needed God and come to God and come to faith and help them walk through some of that. And then to see them turn around and reinvest themselves. And I just want to say, Drew and Christina right here to my right in front, and they faithfully lead AA and Al-Anon, and I just want to say those things comes from the life experience, and they serve. And one of the things that, Drew, we've talked about different times, one of the big priorities for anybody that's in recovery is to learn how to serve, serving. And I saw that in you early on, Drew, and how you started volunteering for things and saying, I'm gonna give back, I'm gonna contribute, and that is, it's interesting, but it's really a place that we find some joy and we find some satisfaction that is greater than we may know. And sometimes sometimes it's hard work, and sometimes it stinks. I mean, there's been times whenever you have 2 or 3 people volunteer to help something at the church or serve in some capacity, and it's a big job. And at the end of the day, you can say, well, you kind of felt good that you did, but man, that was a lot of hard work, and I could have been fishing, or I could have been doing this, So there's a sacrifice involved. But Jesus said, I'm willing to sacrifice for other people. And we know he left the grandeur of heaven, came to this earth, lived among us, and then died a criminal's death, the death we deserved, in order that we could live forever with him. And I love, I don't know if you guys are familiar, or some of you probably have heard me mention it before, but there's a ministry in Los Angeles called the Dream Center. And the Dream Center was started by Matthew Barnett when he was about 20 years old. And his father was a very well-known pastor in Phoenix, Arizona, of a mega church there. But so Matthew kind of grew up in the church, grew up probably in the front row, and kind of did everything. He'd gone to Bible college, and then he was just 20 years old. He was thrown down here in the middle. He volunteered to do it, and felt like God was leading him right in the middle of a bad section of LA. And through his serving there, many wonderful ministries have developed. One of the ministries that they have is for taking runaway teenagers off the streets of LA, and they have this old hospital they restored, and different floors of the hospital are there for different kind of needs. And so they in that ministry, they have this, like I said, the one for the runaway kids. And there was a lady that came to him and said, Pastor Barnett, I'm very, very depressed. I've been going through a deep, deep depression. And I've been to a psychologist. I've been to different doctors. I've been to everybody. I've taken medications, and nothing is helping. And she was a well-educated person, just not just somebody without any understanding of things. She was, and she just said she couldn't shake her depression. So she thought, maybe I had to go talk to my pastor and see if there's something he can do to help me. And so, as a result, the pastor said to her, he said, well, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm going to ask you to, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We have this floor of runaway girls that we pick up off the streets of LA. And those girls, they need someone who represents something comforting to them. So I'm going to ask you to do this. For the next 2 weeks, if you wouldn't mind, bake cookies every day and take them over to that tower and go up to whatever floor and tell them you're there to give cookies to the girls. She said, Pastor Barnett, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I cannot believe you would tell me to go pass out cookies to get over my depression. So she kind of, and he said, well, you've tried the doctors, you've tried the medicine, you've tried this, you've tried the other. He said, I think you ought to try serving. And so he kind of stuck to his guns, and she was kind of smoke coming out of her ears and everything, and she left his office. And he hadn't seen her for a while, and he bumped into her one Sunday at the church. And he said, oh, Mrs. So-and-so, he said, you never ever came back to see me. I was wondering how you're doing. She said, oh, Pastor, she said, I started baking cookies and started taking them over those girls and loving on those girls, and I don't even know why I was depressed. I'm so happy. And she was like, she's like this whole transformed person. Like, she said, I got so busy not being depressed, I forgot to come back and tell you, And so but what was happening was, if you ever start looking inward so long and so hard, I will tell you, that's depressing. All you can do is think about yourself, think about your own problems, think about your own, man, it'll cycle down to a bunch of nothing. You got to get outside of yourself. Jesus said, I'm willing to sacrifice for others. I think that's a good example for us to be able to say, I'm willing to sacrifice for others. And I do believe that starts in our home. We're willing to sacrifice for our family. We're willing to sacrifice then for others as well. Number 9, I want to do God's will, not mine. Jesus said, I came to do what God wants me to do, not what I want to do. That's from the New Century Version. And he also said, I want the world to know that I love the Father, and that is why I do everything exactly as the Father tells me to do. And so I think this goes back to the audience of one. But the question is, are we willing to submit our will to God's will? And, and what I say is this, sometimes people say, well, I don't really know for sure what God's will is in this. That's where I'd like to say, use some good sanctified sense. Evaluate the scriptures with regard to what you're thinking about doing and understand, pray, ask God for wisdom, ask him for help, ask him to open doors, close doors, ask him to give you a sense of his peace or to disrupt that peace by the process that you're in. And in doing so, I believe what happens for us is then we begin to discern what God's will is. And if we will seek out his will, I don't think he's trying to play hide and seek with us. He'll show us his will. He'll reveal it to us. But the real question is, if we understand what God's will is, will we do it? Or will we say, no, I really want to do it this way? I want to encourage you to follow the example of Jesus. That Jesus was the Son of God, and he all power is invested in him. And yet he said, I'm not here to do just anything I want to do. I'm here to do the will of the Father who sent me. Number 10, I think with an eternal perspective. Jesus was willing, and this is not a quote of Jesus. This is a statement about him from Hebrews chapter 12. Jesus was willing to die a shameful death on the cross because of the joy he knew would be his afterward. Now he is seated in the place of highest honor beside God's throne in heaven. Jesus was willing to go to the cross because of what was going to come beyond the cross. And anytime that we are facing something that seems insurmountable, I think a good question to ask is, what does this have to do with eternity? Keep an eternal perspective. I have a notebook I call my life notebook. And one of the pages in that notebook it's the short list of life goals. And so it's at the very top, there are 3 things that are listed that overshadow everything else that is stated. And it's a fairly simple list because it's the overarching goal sheet for life. And one of the statements, one of those 3, what I would consider, they're not to be changed. They are to remain the same no matter what comes under here, and whatever comes under here needs to reflect those 3. And one of those is that everything I do and every decision I make, I do it with eternity in mind. And so I have to look at, there are things that any of us could do, say start today, that you could just use an example. You could leave your family. You could go find something you think suits you better. You could go. But the question you have to ask yourself on that is, in light of eternity, how does that decision play out? What does that decision look like? And so what happens for people oftentimes is they will do something for a temporary result without taking into mind the eternal consequences of that. And so I would like to encourage you I wish I could say, boy, I've been perfect at that. I bat 1,000 on the, every decision I make, everything I've done, that it fell completely in that line. I know that's not the case, but I will tell you, anytime that I actually sit down and think seriously about it, one of the first things that comes to my mind, if it's an important decision at all, has any importance or any bearing on my life or my family's life or the church life, is this, and that is, in light of eternity, what would be the wise decision here? In light of eternity. Because, see, this life, at the longest, is short. And every year, it gets shorter, okay? Every year, it gets a little shorter. And so, when you're young, it still kind of feels like it's way out there. But once you kind of get over that, at this point, if I say I've lived half of my life, I'm a pretty optimistic person, I can tell you that right now, okay? But so the truth is, you get past that half mark, you start looking out and going, you don't dwell on it every day, but you're aware of it. This life is short. And so the decisions that I make, the things that I do, I want them to reflect that I'm thinking about eternity when I'm making those decisions, an eternal perspective. Jesus said, man, I don't want to go to the cross. I don't want to go to the cross. I do not want to do this. Please, is there any other way? And yet, I'm willing to, because of the salvation of so many and the prospect of those who are saved through my work, living with me for all of eternity. That joy that's set before me, I'm doing it. I'm going to do it. Hard as it is, tough as it is. So sometimes I just need to say, toughing something out, fighting your way through matters if it matters for eternity. If it's just being tough to be tough, then it may not matter. But if it's being toughing your way through some things for the light of eternity, for what the perspective of eternity, is worth it.